This is the story of that night when I, just another regular taxi driver, picked up a passenger who stole my trust and challenged my very existence. This isn't a ghost story, but a true story, one that you might not believe. But while listening, you'll feel a shadow of fear creeping in your eyes. My name is Sudip, and I am a taxi driver. It was a late night, and I was driving down a deserted road. It was raining heavily, and the cold wind made the night even worse. Suddenly, I saw a man standing at the side of the road. His face was completely lowered, and his clothes were soaked. I stopped the car. "Where to?" I asked from the window. Without lifting his head, he said, "To the old bridge." I thought, just another passenger. I just had to drop him off safely. The man sat in the car without saying a word. I slowly started the car, and we both drove down the dark road. He remained silent, and I began wondering why people still chose this road. No one usually takes this route. After a while, I tried to talk to him. "Where are you from?" He answered without looking at me. "I'm nowhere, just in the air here." His voice had a strange depth to it, as though he was aware that I was just seeing him as another passenger. I noticed that his eyes avoided mine every time I tried to make eye contact. At times, it felt like he was lost in some other thought. But still, I didn't pay much attention. Then suddenly, the radio went silent. An eerie stillness filled the car. I tried turning the radio on again, but only strange whispering sounds came out. I nervously smiled, but the man didn't react. He stayed silent, as though he was unaffected. We were now passing through a long stretch of road with dense trees on both sides. Rain was falling heavily, and the sound of drops on the windows was all that could be heard. You know, people disappear on this road. "Many accidents have happened here," he suddenly said. "What do you mean?" I asked, startled. "This road has always been deadly. It's a trap. Every driver who passes through here eventually ends up having to stop at that same bridge someday." I laughed it off. "That's just nonsense. What are you talking about?" But he stayed silent. His silence was now scaring me. I noticed a strange shadow under his eyes, as if he had been through some deep suffering. I couldn't bring myself to look at him anymore. We reached the old bridge. It looked ancient and terrifying. This wasn't just any ordinary bridge. It had a history of accidents. "Stop here," he said. I stopped the car and looked at him, but the back seat was empty. I was startled and stepped out of the car. I shouted, "How did you get out?" He was standing near the bridge. I looked down, and the ground under his feet seemed wet, but he wasn't stepping into the water. It looked as if he was floating towards me in the air. "Do you know? This bridge is a trap. Everyone who comes here gets stuck. You won't help me, and this will be your last step," he said. I ran toward the car, calling out, "What are you saying? What's going on?" But he disappeared into the dark. Suddenly, the car engine made a strange noise, and the car started moving on its own towards the bridge. I was completely terrified, but the car was moving by itself. The car was speeding toward the bridge, and I tried everything to stop it, but my legs felt frozen. The man was there again, but now he didn't look like before. He had merged with the bridge's walls. His eyes were completely black, and his face was now just a shadow. He slowly came toward me. "You didn't help me. Now you're in my place. Your time is up," he said, and then a terrifying scream echoed in the car. The car suddenly skidded to a stop at the edge of the bridge. I looked outside, and I saw a car submerged in the water below. Inside was the same man. But now he had turned into a ghostly figure. A whole family was with him. This is the same family that died on this bridge. Now, you are here with them, he said. The next morning, my car was found near the bridge. There were bloodstains inside the car, but I was nowhere to be found. No one knows what happened that night. People say that the bridge still attracts people. Even today, if you pass that bridge at night, you will see a man standing there waiting for a ride in the back seat. And when you offer him a ride, he will ask you just one question. Will you take me to my destination? If you don't answer correctly, you too will never return. It was around midnight. Ajay stood at a small deserted bus stop on the outskirts of Mumbai. He was returning from his friend's wedding and waiting for the last bus to Pune. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and a light drizzle added to the chilling atmosphere. There were no other vehicles near the bus stop. The road was eerily empty. In the distance, stray dogs howled, and the faint chirping of crickets from the nearby trees made the night even more unsettling. Ajay's phone had run out of battery. He had no way to call for help, or even check the time. Suddenly, through the dense fog, an old, worn-out bus appeared. Its headlights flickered erratically, and its engine made a strange growling noise. The destination board was blank. As the bus came to a halt, the door creaked open slowly. The driver, with a shadowed face, peered out and said, "Last bus. Get in quickly if you want a ride." Ajay hesitated but eventually stepped inside, the need to reach Pune overriding his unease. The bus interior was dimly lit, with faint yellow bulbs flickering in and out. The atmosphere was damp and smelled of mildew. The seats were old, torn and stained. There were 8 or 9 passengers already seated. The clothes were outdated and shabby. None of them showed any emotion. They all stared blankly out of the windows, as if lost in thought or something else. Ajay chose a seat at the front. He tried to peer outside through the window, but the glass was foggy and smeared with grime, making it impossible to see clearly. Moments later, the bus began moving. A few minutes into the journey, Ajay noticed something strange. The bus had veered off the main road and was now on a narrow, desolate path surrounded by dense forest. Ajay leaned forward and asked the driver, "Where are we going?" "The highway to Pune is in the opposite direction." Without turning his head, the driver replied in a monotonous voice, "Shortcut. Sit back and relax." Ajay felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at the other passengers, but none of them seemed bothered by the change in route. Their silence and stillness only added to the unease. Suddenly, the bus came to a halt. The door creaked open again, and a tall figure stepped inside. The man was dressed in a long black coat and wore a hood that concealed his face. As the man entered, the other passengers slowly turned their heads toward him, their expressions twisting into strange, almost sinister smiles. The man silently moved to the back of the bus and sat down. Ajay noticed something chilling in the reflection on the window. The man's shadow was missing. Ajay's heartbeat quickened. The bus now ventured deeper into the forest. The road became bumpier, and the surrounding darkness seemed to close in. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the bus. Ajay shivered as the temperature plummeted. He wrapped his jacket tightly around himself. Then, he heard faint whispers. The sound came from all around him, soft yet menacing. He strained to understand, but the whispers were in a language he didn't recognize. When he glanced at the window again, he saw something terrifying. His own reflection wasn't moving in sync with him. It seemed delayed, as though it had a life of its own. The bus suddenly stopped in front of an old, decrepit mansion. The driver announced, "Stop for those who need to get off." The passengers began to rise one by one, their movements slow and unnatural. As they stepped into the dim light, their appearances transformed. Their skin was pale and decomposed, their eyes glowing faintly, and their faces distorted with unholy expressions. Ajay looked toward the driver, who turned to face him for the first time. His face was no longer human. His eyes were sunken pits, and his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. The driver said, "You've boarded the wrong bus. This ride is only for those whose time is up." Panic-stricken, Ajay tried to escape, but the doors slammed shut. The bus began to accelerate, and its lights flickered out completely. Ajay's screams echoed as the bus disappeared into the dark forest. The next morning, local authorities found a burnt-out bus in the middle of the forest. There were no passengers or driver inside. Legend has it that this bus appears to pick up those with unrepented sins or unfinished fates. Would you dare to board this bus? It was nighttime, and Samir, a lawyer, was driving back to Kochi from Kerala. Alone in his car, he decided to take a detour off the main road. As soon as he turned onto a smaller path, his phone suddenly shut down. Thinking the battery had died, he checked, but the screen showed no signs of life. Brushing it off, he continued driving but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this road. The path was eerily quiet, with no houses or shops on either side, just silence and pitch-black darkness. Samir decided he wouldn't go too far and would turn back to the main road soon. But as he drove on, a strange sight caught his eye. A vintage car stood abandoned by the side of the road, its door ajar. There was no one inside. He slowed down to take a closer look, but found nothing unusual. Unnerved, he picked up speed, but the creeping sense of a tread gnawed at him. Suddenly, the steering wheel of his car began to turn on its own, as if an invisible force was controlling it. Samir panicked and managed to wrestle it back, but by then, he had veered onto an even narrower, unmarked road. Tall, dense trees lined both sides, blocking out what little moonlight there was. He tried retracing his steps, but the road seemed to twist and turn on its own. Looking in his rear-view mirror, he was horrified to see the same vintage car now parked right behind him. Only this time, a figure was emerging from it. The man was unsettlingly strange, his face pale and blurred, as if shrouded in mist. Samir's heart raced. He hit the accelerator, but his car refused to pick up speed. The figure began walking toward him with a deliberate, menacing pace. Samir's car finally lurched forward, and he found himself on a path leading into a dense forest. Confused and terrified, he kept driving, hoping for an escape. But then his headlights flickered and went out. The car's engine sputtered and died. A loud thud jolted him. It was coming from outside the car. Gathering his courage, Samir opened the door to look, but the area around him was empty. Before he could close the door, a white-clad figure emerged from the shadows. The figure's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and its voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not on the right path," it said, with a chilling smile that sent shivers down Samir's spine. Desperate, Samir got back into the car and locked the doors. After several frantic attempts, the car roared to life. But the road ahead had changed. It now led to an ancient, crumbling ruin, resembling a deserted fort. Samir parked the car and stepped out, hoping to find help. Ahead, he saw a decrepit hut, its wooden planks rotting and covered in moss. He hesitated but decided to investigate. Inside, the hut was empty, save for a dusty old diary lying on the floor. He opened it, and his hands trembled as he read the first line. "Whoever enters this road shall never return." Panicking, he dropped the diary and bolted for the door. As he stepped outside, the pale man in white stood just a few feet away, grinning. "You've gone too far," he said. "There's no turning back now. You must face the consequences of the steps you've taken." Samir tried running to his car, but the road was gone. In its place was an endless void of trees and fog. His car had disappeared, leaving only the suffocating silence of the forest. The next morning, police found a burnt car on the abandoned road. There was no sign of Samir, but the seats were stained with blood. Investigations revealed that this was no ordinary path. It was cursed. Those who ventured here often carried dark secrets, and the road demanded they pay the price. So, do you dare to take the road that no one returns from? If you manage to sleep after this story, facing the next video might not be as easy. Do you dare to watch it? By the way, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.